On November the 1st, 1983, Moscow and Washington were linked by satellite and television for a most unusual scientific conference. Their purpose was to discuss new work by atmospheric scientists, which predicts that the climate of the Earth could change dramatically after a nuclear war, with weeks or months of darkness and intense cold.
It was no surprise to my colleagues in the Soviet Union, namely that a very large group of prominent biologists in the United States presented with the scenarios that Dr. Sagan just described could come to a unanimous conclusion on the consequences for biological systems.
The drop in temperature being discussed would be great enough to cause the extinction of thousands of species and to destroy food crops over much of the planet.
Professor Sagan has already spoken of this at the beginning of the conference. Thus we are raising the very question of life on Earth.
The nuclear age began when the first atom bomb was exploded in 1945 in New Mexico. Scientists then knew little about the effects of a nuclear explosion. But now it's thought that this test may have caused hundreds of deaths from leukemia. Only 3 weeks later, the first atom bomb was used in warfare. Hiroshima had been spared conventional bombing so that the effects of this grim experiment could be documented with precision. Time stood still at 12 minutes past 8 on August the 6th.
I want to tell you some truths today, some real truths that you're probably not aware of. To fight a system with a system is impossible. It's impossible. You cannot do it. You have nowhere to go for recourse. If you don't understand what recourse means, it means there is nowhere you can go to get justice because there isn't any. There isn't any justice at all. We live in the world of what's called the precautionary principle. Has anybody heard of this? Anyone come from a building site? Health and safety? Precautionary principle. Boots and all that, yeah, to put wood on a wall. Right, we live in a world of this precautionary principle. Now, I don't know if you know this, but your wonderful government, just about a mile down there, got a pretty building. He's just putting through a bill. Do you know, a bill goes through Parliament and becomes an act of Parliament. Now in this bill it says that all public servants are going to be void of prosecution for negligence. It's got something to do with the swine flu. So they can pump you full of this vaccine, and if you suddenly go, or whatever happens to you, they can't be prosecuted for negligence. Precautionary principles. It's called the what-if syndrome. That's what I call it. Another thing you might find interesting is that the sovereignty of Parliament is being transferred to every local council. Well, it's all in black and white. Go and look for it yourself, you go and find it. But you haven't got the time to go and look for this stuff, have you? One of the things that we live in is what's called a core belief system. And a core belief system is one of the hardest things you can possibly break out of. And then we're all trying to break out of it, but we just don't know we are. Core belief systems come from one system. They originate from one place. But they've manifested over years and years into different systems. But they all originate from that original system. These systems are systems of what are called control. We are controlled. Has anybody ever looked at the word con nautically? What does it mean? It means to navigate. It means to steer the course of a vessel. And what's a troll? Come on, it's that simple. Trick trap over the bridge. And what happens when we buck the system? What comes into play? The control. This is how simple it is. I realise that all of this that we live in started with a book. And it's going to end with a book. The reason it's got to end with a book is because there is a book that created a core belief system that everyone has subscribed to. Whether you meant to or you realise you have, doesn't matter. You do subscribe to it because you accept everything that goes on in this country and in this world daily. You accept it. And it's normally done in the name of something. Now I'm going to do this because Roger asked me, because I wasn't actually going to talk here today. I rang you up to politely decline, didn't I? I threatened him. He did actually, yeah. You're such a bully. But I want to talk about the 1911 Parliament Act. I want to show you something that happened that you're not aware of. Because I want to show you the actual reason really why we have this thing called a constitution. Okay? That is not actually here to benefit you in any shape, form or fashion. It's a device of manipulation and corruption. It's been systematically arranged over 700 and odd years to achieve something that could not be done, and that was the oppression of the people of this island. Because the people behind this fear us to such an extent, they daren't come out rightly and tell you that you are serfs to them. They put through things like this. When you read this document for yourself, now I'm going to explain it to you now. I'm going to explain a little bit about it. I rang up Parliament the other day. I love having a chat with them. When I first used to ring up Parliament, I couldn't speak their language. You have to speak their language. Don't have to put on the voice. The women actually in the audience are better at this because you have a telephone voice. And that's the voice you need when you're speaking to these people. But what you need is their language, so you have to speak in their language. Okay? I can speak their language now, so I get a lot more answers. And I rang up Parliament the other day and I happened to get hold of a very, very nice man who I actually asked if I could meet him outside Parliament sometime to have a proper chat, which he declined. I don't know why, but he declined. But he told me something that's very interesting. He said to me, I asked him a simple question. I asked him, do we live in what is called a representative democracy, or do we live in a democracy? And he said, well, that's a very complicated question. I said, well, it's not actually. It's either one or the other. And he said, well, democracy. I went, oh, right, thank you very much. Glad we cleared that one up. I said, I've been looking into the 1911 Parliament Act, was researched from my book, and I found something in there that says that we don't have a democracy whatsoever. And he said, oh, I'm very interested. He said, what's this then? I said, well, according to what I can see, that the 1911 Parliament Act set up the one-party majority within the House of Commons as a dictatorship, removing royal assent and removing the power of the Lords, which were the three sections needed for any act, legislation, supposed law coming into this country. I said, but according to this document that I have in my hand, this has happened and we are now being railroaded. The people of this island are being railroaded because of this document. He said, well, I absolutely agree with you. What? You're agreeing with me that there's a dictatorship within the House of Commons? Oh yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Oh, okay. I said, well, what about representation? He said, oh no, there's no representation for the people. They're only there to represent the wishes of the elite. Now, I found this very fascinating. And this is true. This is one that I will not lie to you. This is honest truth. This man said this to me. And that's what I said. I'd love to meet you outside Parliament. He said, well, that wouldn't, we can't do that. I said, all right, fascinating. So I rang up Parliament again, and I spoke to a very nice young lady, because I wanted to find out about something called the Select Committee, or Committee of Selection it's called. Turns out when a bill's going through Parliament, the Speaker of Parliament will call 10 MPs as a select committee to look at amendments. They actually can create 10 of these. So I said to her quite simply, how is that reflected? She said, but it's reflected on the majority in the House at the time. What? So you're telling me that every select committee is biased towards the one-party majority within the House at the time? She said, yes. I said, hold on a minute. So you're telling me every select committee is actually biased to Labour? So they'll always go with what Labour says? She says, well, yeah, pretty much. And you call that democracy? Oh, well, she said, I can't really discuss this any further, which you get a lot when you're talking about these subjects. Especially when you start hitting the nail on the head. So, I'm like, hold on, I'm stunned by all this. I'm making these phone calls, and Heb was, I come into Heb, I said, you never believe what I've just had this conversation with Parliament. So anyway, I look a little bit deeper into the Parliament Act, and this is the Act here. Remember, this is part of our so-called constitutional protection. This document, it's one of the Acts. It's quite interesting because it says here on the left-hand side, it says, powers of the House of Lords as money bills. Now, I don't know if you know the history of this document. And this was at a time when there was a Prime Minister called Henry Herbert Asquith. And Henry Herbert Asquith was part of the Liberal Party. His right-hand man, he had two, David Lloyd George and Winston Churchill. They were trying to put through a bill called the People's Budget. In all intents and purposes, if you actually look at the People's Budget, it's a bloody good document. A really good document. But it was a smokescreen because they needed this. This is what they needed. So anyway, I don't know if you know this, but in 1910, when Edward VII was the king, there was two general elections. I don't know if you know this. There was one in January, one in December. Our first one in January ended up with a hung parliament. Do you know what hung parliament is? Yeah? There was no majority. It was bang on. The seats were contained within, equal seating. Asquith, with Lloyd George's help and Winston Churchill's help, presented to Edward VII the 1910 Parliament Act, which is, all intents and purposes, this document. Edward VII read it, supposedly, and said to Asquith, to put this document through will cause, or make this bill an act, will cause a constitutional crisis, and sent it back. I don't know if you know the process, but a bill comes into the House of Commons or the House of Lords or private members' bill, they're bounced about like this, and all the amendments are done, blah, 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 blah. Once it's done, the House of Commons puts what's called a Speaker's Certificate on it, and then it goes off to the Queen for her to put a moniker on it. Royal Assent, that's called. That's the three system, that's how it's meant to come in. When Edward VII sent it back, saying it would cause a constitutional crisis, because he realised what was wrote in this document. And what this document took away was the need for royal assent, and it actually took away the powers of the House of Lords to stop any bill coming through Parliament, no matter what they put through. They could put a bill through tomorrow that says that all blue-eyed babies on Tuesdays born at 10 o'clock have to be killed, and there is nothing that can stop them from doing it. Nothing. Because of this piece of paper. But would you accept that? So why do you accept everything else that's done this? Why don't you just turn around and say, no, you're not doing this no more? Edward VII died the latter part of 1910 from a heart attack. And we had a new king come to the throne, it was George V. And George V was a little bit green in the gills, supposedly. Didn't really understand the constitution, plus he'd been taught by Fabian. Sir Henry Martin, if I remember rightly. Anyway, cut a long story short, Asquith decided to present the 1911 bill to George V. He sent about 20 letters, private letters went across from Asquith to King George. And these are all on the internet if you want to go and have a look for them, so you can actually see the wording that was used. If you get a little book by Roy Jenkins about the Liberal Party, you'll find that they boast about how Asquith persuaded the king. They boast about the fact. And I got that from Ashridge. I don't know if you've heard of Ashridge. Ashridge is a training college for Fabians in, is it Hertfordshire? It is Herts, isn't it? I just wondered if it crossed the border. And do you know what they actually, their business slogan, because it's a business school, do you know what their slogan is? Make money from global warming. Go and look it up yourself. Don't worry about global warming, make money from it. So what happened was, George V, this is what they needed to do. At the time, there was a Conservative majority within the House of Lords that was stopping all money bills going through. So what they needed to do was to take the powers away from them Lords. To do that, they created what's called a second chamber. The second chamber was to be filled with Liberal peers. This was the start of the process of what they call popular peer and not hereditary. If any of you know what Mr. Blair did, bless his heart, to the House of Lords a few years ago, what did he do? He booted out the rest of the hereditary peers. This process started in 1911. So what they did is they needed to get the majority within the House of Commons. It wasn't just good enough to get. Remember, they'd had a hung parliament. So in the last ever election in 1910 was the last time elections were spread over a week. I don't know if you know this, they used to take over a week. It was the last ever one. They needed to control the Commons. This is what Lloyd George and Churchill were up to. So they employed the services of none other than Sinn Féin. In doing this, they created the seat. This is how close it was. The Conservatives got 271 seats. The Liberals, using Sinn Féin, got 272. That's how close it was. The only reason the second general election actually happened was because Edward VII said you cannot curtail the powers of the House of Lords without putting it to the people. So to do it, you have to put it via general election. That's why there was two general elections. Now, the interesting part about this is that George V, for whatever reason, did create them peers. And that second chamber of peers started to control everything else the rest of the peers were doing. If you look at the 1946 Parliament Act, which is the next one on from this one, you'll find that the House of Lords was then contained within only 3 sessions. They could only look at anything. And I don't know if you know this, but none of the amendments are actually looked at. I don't know if you probably don't know this, but the amendments actually just get tagged on. It's all, you can go and find this stuff out here, I don't need me to tell you. But there's some interesting words in here, because one of the things it says here, money bill having been passed by the House of Commons and sent up to the House of Lords at least 1 month before the end of the session is not passed by the House of Lords without amendment within 1 month after it has been sent up to the House. They do write some bollocks, these people. I could write this in a sentence. Up to the House of Bill. The bill shall, unless the House of Commons direct to the contrary, be presented to His Majesty to become an Act of Parliament on the Royal Assent being signified, notwithstanding that the House of Lords have not consented to the bill. Now, if you don't understand what the word notwithstanding means, it means in spite of. Complete override of the House of Lords on money bills. If you carry on through the Act, you'll find that for all bills, whether they be money, public or private, in this document. It gets better. If you go on the House of Parliament site, if you go on the OPSI site, I don't know if you've ever done this, but go on the one that's called Bills Going Through Parliament. Okay, just type that into Google. Bills going through Parliament. And you will get a list of all the bills going through Parliament as of now. Yeah? And they've all got a certain wording at the top of them. And what you'll find that wording says is this. It says, be enacted. Now, it says that because if you write at the top of something and you give it to someone saying, be enacted, there's not much of a choice, is there? Now, I could be just saying that because the words, but if you actually look at what they put at the beginning of it, on the second paragraph down, you'll see it says, be it therefore enacted. Do you know what the word therefore means? If you put therefore before something, it means that you've already logically concluded it's going to happen. This was a royal assent override. Whether you believe it or not, it was. When you suddenly realise that now the speaker's certificate is actually good enough as royal assent. It basically is the royal assent. So when you see this that's written in the back of here, it says, any certificate of the Speaker of the House of Commons given under this Act shall be conclusive for all purposes and shall not be questioned in any court of law. In their own words, in black and white. I ask you, what does that create? A dictatorship. In their own words. I will leave this here, because I've got many copies. Like I said, this is going up on the internet. It needs to go up on the internet, because you people need to look at this. You really do. That's just one example. I can give you hundreds.
What's the website going to be on?
TPUC. Yeah, that's our website. When you start to look at this stuff, you'll suddenly realise what you've been subscribing to. And you'll realise that what was set up to protect you, according to them, is absolutely the complete opposite. And the only way that you will ever do anything to change this situation is when you learn to say no. So there's a hive mentality. And the hive mentality is the core belief system that you've subscribed to, because you 100% every single day accept what's going on without doing anything about it. Because you daren't say no to these people because they're wearing costumes. But they are. What's a costume? They're not called acts by mistake, because they're played out by actors who are acting wearing costumes. That's all it is. And when they go home at night, they take the costume off and stop being the actor. Get up in the morning, boom, boom, put the costume back on, they're back being the actor again. It's that simple. When you realise they are just an actor wearing a costume, the thing called intimidation starts to lessen. It takes a while, it does take a while. Then fluorescent jackets that the police wear can be quite alarming to some people. I know that. A judge wearing a funny wig on his head, or a barrister wearing a wig and they give it all this. But it's part of the act. Do you reckon they go home at night and walk around, hello darling, I had a good day? If you want to take this government to court Can I ask you a question? What court are you going to actually take them to that they don't own? There isn't one that they don't own. You've just got to get to the reality of this. There isn't a court that these people do not own. So where are you going to take them? There is nowhere. This is the point I'm making. You live in a world of fear which is of your own creation. It's because you allow it to exist, not because they allow it to exist. All they've done is realised that you'll subscribe to this and they just took the piss. When you start to look at this stuff, you'll suddenly realise what you've been subscribing to, and you'll realise that what was set up to protect you, according to them, is absolutely the complete opposite. And the only way that you will ever do anything to change this situation is when you learn to say no, and you stand by it, and you unite. When you suddenly put down the divisions of colour, speech, where we come from, what we look like, how much money we've got, when these divisions have gone, then you will become a people of an island again. Politics comes from one very specific hierarchical system. And politics was devised to divide people. That's all it was ever devised for, was to divide you. Most of the things that have core belief systems create with them create divides. What we need to do is bridge them divides. In learning to say that word, you will start to bridge them divides. And you start to unsubscribe from this core belief system. You end up quite in a very odd position. You are actually a non-believer and a believer at the same time. And that's a very hard thing to be, because you're going to get tugged from both directions. And I know how frustrating it is. I know how hard it is. I would like to leave you with one thing. And I would like to, just this one thing. And this is one of my last talks. I have to write that book. It's very specific now. And I'm on a deadline. They've put me on a deadline because it's the only way to get me to do it. I actually want to go out on the tools. I want to go and build roofs again. I'm fed up with this crap. Because I know how simple it is to do now. It really is that simple. We will keep producing evidence for you on the TPUC. We will keep doing it, and we will keep putting that evidence out. We have accounts now with... We'll keep doing it. Whether you subscribe to it or not, doesn't matter. It will be there for you to look at. Because once you start to uncover corruption, you know that it hides in the shadows of every one of these corporations. And it's the shadows that have to be illuminated. And it's the light bringer they fear. The one who illuminates it. And all potentially, you're all the light bringers. You're the ones who are going to illuminate this corruption just by looking at your own councils. It only takes one of you. So who holds the power? Exactly. When you look at this, we have one thing to do. And this is all we have to do. You were born free. From your first breath, you were free. All of you. Every single one of you. You've just been contained within a belief system that you're now going to break away from. But the gift of freedom belongs to everybody without exception. In these millennium years, let history show that we helped make it so. Thank you.
Scientists have now had 39 years to quantify the effects of the two bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Effects so overwhelming in scale that although both official and independent publications now write of nuclear war, military thinking is still dominated by the effects of single weapons. Weapons of ever-increasing ingenuity and accuracy. The standard nuclear warfare textbook, published by the American Department of Defense, comes complete with a handy plastic computer. You can dial the warhead yield, to give the optimum outcome. Many tests of fireball and blast wave from small single warheads were carried out on military equipment in Nevada and the Soviet Union. "450 nuclear warheads were exploded in the atmosphere before the test ban treaty was signed in 1963.